Hi, my name's Rob Macleod. I'm a school teacher. Right now I'm teaching everything from grade 1 to grade 12 in a school. And I had something happen for the first time in my career just over a month ago. I taught an English lesson to a grade 12 class that ended with the students giving me a round of applause as though a performance had happened. It, to me, was a sign that the lesson was meaningful and useful. I made a passing comment about the strange nature of having students applaud me on my social media, and several people had asked, is there any way I could share a video of the lesson, which I hadn't taped, or could I recreate it? So I thought I'd give that a try on this video and see if I could capture at least the main ideas that I had shared with the class that day. The lesson had kind of a clickbait title of How to Think Like a Genius, but I think that it's true. I think that what I'm about to share with you gives you a scaffold or a technology to begin to think like a genius. It's really just an explanation of the work of the quadrants by Ken Wilber from the Aquil map or integral theory. But I'd like to try and drop a lot of the jargon and just share it in a way that can be accessible to an average grade 10, 11, 12 student and be something that they find useful for writing essays, researching, or creative writing. So let's get into it. How to think like a genius. If you want to be able to think like a genius, you have to understand how you think right now. So when you talk about something, how do you talk about it? Let's take me, for example. We don't know each other. We walk up to each other at a cocktail party. You say, hey, you're a new person. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Well, there's a lot of different things I could tell you. I've kind of organized some of this information into 4 categories. I'll share with you the information and you can see which category they're in by which box they're in. And maybe you can already start to intuit what these 4 categories might be. So I'm Rob Macleod. I'm 37 years old. I am a teacher. It's my profession. Right now I'm weighing in at about 80 kilograms. I'm about 185 centimeters tall, or at least that's what my driver's license says. I'm typically an optimist. Personality-wise, I seek harmony. It's kind of like the software operating system that's constantly going in the back of my head. I do enjoy food, sushis, curries, my dad's homemade Monte Cristos that he only makes on Christmas morning. Those are some of my favorite foods. And I typically tend to be judgmental. If you leave me alone in my private thoughts, I typically end up picking apart like how things could be better. I am Canadian. I'm married a little over a year now. I am the oldest brother in my family. I'm the oldest grandchild in my family as well. If I had to put myself somewhere on a political spectrum, I guess you could say I'm liberal or typically left-leaning, although I obviously do have some critiques within the left wing of things. But yeah, overall, kind of liberal mindset as far as government and things like that go. I am a commuter in Belgium. I am someone who has to take more than one form of transit to get to work. I guess you'd technically qualify me as an immigrant, as I'm someone who's left Canada and lived and worked more permanently in some other countries. I am part of the education system. I mentioned already that I'm a teacher, but essentially I am a piece of that larger system. And right now I'm working in a specific school that has its own ways of doing things, customs, practices, and so on. So these are all things that I might mention about myself casually in passing if we were getting to know each other. But these are 4 very different aspects of myself. And the way to think like a genius is to begin to know which category to put this information in. So here are the 4 categories. The I, that upper left space. The we, that lower left space. The it, the upper right space. And the its, the lower right space. In that upper left space, you've got the interior of the individual. So you can see here on the axes, we've got interior on this side, exterior on this side, individual in these top quadrants, collective in the bottom. So when I talk about the individual interior experience, that's what's happening inside of me. That's something you will never get to experience. I can report on it. I can tell you how I'm feeling. I can tell you what I'm thinking. But the Rob phenomenon experience is only happening to me, just as right now you are having an experience watching this video. That is an experience that only you get to taste or feel. It's your personal interior individual experience. In the lower left, we have the we. This is the interior of the collective. So in my examples here, I talked about, well, being Canadian. And there's a certain shared Canadianness. And when you travel abroad and you end up in different countries, you realize how there's different cultural norms, different cultural, social ways of doing things. I'm married. I'm in a relationship. That's a shared collective space with my wife and I. I'm the oldest in the family. That's my position in the family, but I'm part of a living, breathing family organization. We have our own shared social code. We have our own shared understood norms between each other. And you could say that I'm liberal. That's a group that I belong to. I am a piece of a group. I have a shared interior experience with other liberal-minded people, as well as people on the right as well. But this important part down here in the left is I'm not the only one who experiences this. I am a piece of being the Canadian culture, but I am not the whole Canadian culture, just as I'm not my marriage, but I'm one of the pieces within my marriage. The experience of the marriage I have with my wife is a shared experience between the two of us. My place in my family is a shared interior experience. It's obviously slightly different for all of us, but there's an us, there's a we that is involved in this lower left collective interior experience. Now on to the right-hand side of the quadrants here, the individual exterior. Let's start with the it. So these are facts about me as an individual, exterior things that you can see in the world or that can be measured. I'm 37 years old. You could say I've been around the sun 37 times now. That's one measurable aspect that's true about this physical body that you kind of see on this video. I am a teacher. That is one of the actions. That's one of the roles that I carry out. Right now I'm about 80 kilograms. That fluctuates slightly, but that's pretty much where I'm at right now. That's one characteristic you can describe of this individual thing, this individual exterior body that you could come up and touch or at least see from a distance. And yeah, I'm 185 centimeters right now. That's another way you could describe this individual thing. One way to think of this is these top quadrants. You could kind of think of them like a tree and the bottom quadrant's kind of like a forest. So yeah, I'm 37, I'm a teacher, I'm 80 kilograms, I'm 185 centimeters. There's many more objective facts about me. But I also, just like a tree, belong within an exterior world. I belong within an exterior system. So I'm a commuter. There's transit systems I am a part of. I am not the transit system, but I'm a piece of the system. I am a commuter within it. An immigrant. I exist within the international laws and the immigration policies between different countries. I exist within the passport and visa systems right now. Part of who I am is embedded within these systems. I am part of the education system. I'm someone fulfilling specific roles to ensure that curriculum is taught and that assessments are carried out. I am a piece of the system. I am one tree within the forest, within the ecosystem. No one tree is the whole ecosystem, but without those individual trees, you don't have a larger collective forest or ecosystem. I'm part of one specific school. So if we zoom in from, say, the national level of looking at a large-scale education system within that forest, there's a little spot near a beautiful little bend in the river. I'm part of a school and its systems, its structures. I'm the guy who carries out some of the lessons in English from grades 1 through 12. I am a part of that system. So on the tops, you have the individual things, the individual experiences, individual objective physical things that you can see and touch. And then down here, you have the groups, the collectives of those individuals. If you take a whole bunch of these things from up here and put them together, you can get these lower quadrants. So those are 4 ways that you could think about me. You can think about what's my own individual experience, what collectives, what relationships am I a part of, what's unique to me as an individual entity, and how am I embedded within the larger systems, the larger structures. One way to feel into this kind of lower right collective exterior is, I think it was David Suzuki I read years ago. He said, can you explain where your lungs, I'm paraphrasing, I've probably messed up the quote, but it's something to the effect of, can you point out where your lungs begin and end, and where the process of like oxygen creation and photosynthesis begin and end? Can you separate yourself from your nervous system and your environment and, the oxygen, the water around you? Sure, there are individual measurements you could take about those qualities within your body, but you are also part of a larger system that's going on, whether those be natural, like ecosystems, or whether they be man-made, like economic systems. So there's the 4 quadrants. There's 4 different ways we could organize information about me. But this isn't just about organizing information about me. These are 4 perspectives, you could say. 4 perspectives that are constantly arising. They are always there. And you can touch into them. This is kind of like the old parable about the elephant. I believe it goes something like, there's 4 or 5 blind people standing around an elephant, and a passerby says, hey, describe an elephant to me. And the person with their hands around the big thick legs of the elephant says, oh, an elephant, and if I didn't mention this, they are supposedly blind or unable to see the elephant or blindfolded. The person who's standing at the leg says, oh, an elephant is like a tree trunk. Thick, massive, strong, powerful, unmovable. That's what an elephant is. And the person who can't see, who's touching the tail, says, oh no, it's, bristly like a paintbrush or like a snake. It's very thin and movable and, constantly in motion. And the person who's at the ears is touching the ears and says, no, it's neither of those things. The elephant, it's very thin and papery and very soft and delicate to the touch. And, the one standing at the trunk is touching this sort of snotty, moist section and says, no, it's they like touching the exposed part of fruit, like it's wet and kind of mushy, and that's what an elephant is. No one piece of that information is the whole elephant, but those 4 different perspectives are arising together, and all of them are true. They're partially true. So just like any one of these quadrants is partially true about me, it's not all of me. It's not all of the describable characteristics of me. To just focus on my own experience of my optimism, like Rob's version of optimism, my seeking of harmony, my enjoyment of food, the pleasure I get from it, the judgmentalness that I have, yeah, those are me, but that's like holding one part of the elephant. That's not all of me. You could add like another part and talk, touching the elephant's tail and say, well, he's Canadian and he's got this marriage, and that's, where Rob resides, and he's the eldest brother and oldest grandchild in his family, and he's kind of liberal-minded, and it's like, again, also very true, but that's not the totality of who I am. All four of these are co-arising. All four of these perspectives on me are happening simultaneously at the same time. So discussing any one of them isn't the total picture. It's just a partial truth of who and what I am. This has been abstract. Let's make this a little bit more concrete. So essentially these four quadrants, the I, the we, the it, and the its, you can kind of put into those boxes whatever words are functional or useful for you for your thinking. If you want to think like a genius, know that those four perspectives exist and then engage with each of those four because they are arising, they're happening at all times anyways. My judgmentalness doesn't stop and my being in a marriage takes over, or that shuts down and the commuter part of me takes over, or, the 80 kilograms of me doesn't take over. Those things are always arising together. So let's take these four quadrants and begin to kind of play around with what words we put in there that we can anchor to or reference in order to ensure that our thinking is taking in these four perspectives and not just taking them in, but engaging with them to have a more complete, more holistic, more fulfilled perspective on what it is we're discussing. So in that upper left, we might talk about feelings or thoughts or just the subjective nature of whatever we're discussing. We could move down to that lower left and talk about the cultural meanings of certain things. We could talk about the relational aspects of a topic. We can talk about, what did I write? My writing's so messy here. The shared meaning is what that says. The sense that you and I can hear a word and we resonate together. We're having a shared interior experience of what's being discussed. When I'm holding this paper and I say paper, as long as you're an English speaker, you're probably looking at this because we have a shared agreement about the word paper. You're not looking at like the light in the back here going, is that what he's talking about? No, we've got a shared meaning, a shared understanding around words and language. You might want to reference things in the upper right and talk about the objective or the measurable or the nouns and verbs, the things and what they are doing. Or down in the lower right, you might want to talk about systems, environments, networks, the larger pictures, the larger frameworks that all of this stuff is fitting into. So those are the four quadrants, and you can insert whatever words are most helpful into these quadrants. These are just a few examples. I could list about 15, 20 words for each of these, but hopefully this gets your mind working about how you can look at different aspects. So let's get even more concrete. We've been very abstract so far. How does this help you think like a genius? Well, I stumbled across this a little while ago when teaching my students how to do creative writing. I gave them the four quadrants to talk about the four different types of description. So every sentence in every book that you have ever read, it uses sentences that hit one of these four boxes. Guaranteed. If you can stump it, awesome. Tell me in the comments below. I've done this with several classes over the last 4 years. Not a single class has been able to find a sentence that doesn't fit into one of these boxes or fit into more than one of these boxes. So the four types of description in any story, you could be describing the thoughts and feelings that a character or a person in the story is having. You could describe their dialogue and the relationships, what's being said between people and how those people are connected. In the upper right, you could talk about actions and objects, things that could include people, but could include inanimate objects as well. What are the things doing? What are the nouns verbing? As I sometimes say to my students, what's the stuff up to? And then finally, the setting and the context, the when and where a moment in your story is happening. I often give the example with my students, a cemetery at 12 o'clock noon is a very different place It can be the same place, the same setting, same cemetery, totally different context, walking in at 12 o'clock noon versus walking in at midnight on Halloween Eve, or on the 1-year anniversary of the tragic monster incident in your town. So there's one way you could apply these 4 quadrants and think like a genius, because the best writing we've found in my English classes is writing that balances these 4 quadrants. It doesn't have to make all 4 quadrants equal in your writing, but often if you're missing one of these 4, you're missing something that doesn't allow your reader to engage fully with your writing. These are 4 perspectives that are constantly arising at all times. Now, one other way this can be incredibly helpful is to realize that people tend to have a favorite quadrant and speak from that quadrant. So when we're processing an issue or talking about a topic, if we put the topic of Rob here in the center, we can talk about these 4 different perspectives on Rob. But not just me, you can do this with any topic. And we do this all the time, and we don't realize that we're doing it. So for example, I tend to orient from the upper left, that interior individual side of things. So I'm often looking at the feeling of something, the experience of what something is like, whereas others might look for something more objective or a shared resonance or a bigger picture systemic view. Let's use an example. Shortly after I discovered the quadrants, there'd been a really tragic school shooting in America. And it was really strange for me to watch a panel discussion. I believe it was on CNN. And I don't think CNN intentionally picked these 4 people because each was referencing a different quadrant. But the question was posed to them: how do we end mass school shootings? Incredibly important question. And these 4 people were disagreeing with each other about the way to go about it. And each was representing a different quadrant. In the upper left, the individual interior experience, they were saying these mass shootings are happening simply because of a mental health issue. This isn't about the guns. This isn't about our culture. This isn't about laws that we have in place. This is a mental health issue. Unhealthy people would have the idea, the belief, the motivation. These are kind of the words of that upper left space, that individual interior. These people have the motivation, the desire, the drive to do this. They are thinking about it, ruminating on it, and they're taking action on the plans they've concocted, and likely from an unhealthy state of mind. So we have to address mass shootings and gun violence on the mental health, the psychological level. And then someone's disagreeing and saying, no, this isn't an individual thing. This is a we thing. Interior collective. In America, we have this gun violence culture. We have a history, a shared sense of how this country came to be. We've got our Second Amendment rights, and, we value guns more so than other cultures. And, this is coming out of our love of violent movies and violent video games. This is a shared, unique thing to us here in America, and this is why we're having these problems. We can't address this on the mental health issue. We need to address this on the larger cultural scale. And then someone arguing with them, no, it's the individual exterior. It's the specific guns that are being used. It's the speed with which they can fire. It's this assault rifle level speed of like military grade guns that are carrying out these activities. And cases being made for slower firing guns that take longer to reload. It's the specific number of shots that can be fired within a second, and how large the chambers are, and all these sorts of things. It's the specific details of these guns where the real problem lies. And then down in the lower right, it became this collective exterior discussion of saying, no, it's not mental health. It's not our cultural side. It's not these specific guns. No. the systems are letting us down. It's our laws. This is a gun control issue. This is an issue with how schools are set up, the environment of them, the space of them. The problem with this is how we could re-engineer the environments of schools better to prevent things like this. It's a matter of protocol, a matter of procedure of how schools do lockdown drills. This is a law issue. It was fascinating to me that all four of them seem to have a valid point. But when you realize that someone else's point isn't coming from your quadrant, it sounds wrong. And this is partly why I think everyone sounds wrong on the internet. Often we're speaking from a different quadrant, and we might be making perfectly good cases for things, but we can't hear each other because we're talking from a different space. And if you don't address crossing the lines into one of the other quadrants, usually people don't hear you, or just simply misrepresent what you're saying, or ignore you, because you're not speaking from their quadrant, from their box, the perspective with which they're taking their part of the elephant, if you will. So we tend to favor thinking about things from one of these quadrants. So if you want to think like a genius, it's helpful to identify which quadrant you value or orient from or tend to gravitate towards, and then see if you can bring in those other three perspectives to help balance that out slightly. Because whatever perspective you are not bringing into your thinking or into your plans specifically, that's probably the one that's going to sink your ship. The one that you're not paying attention to, when you're not giving your presence and conscious attention to, is likely going to be where problems emerge for you. So a party trick that I had heard to tell which quadrant you tend to favor is just answer this question. You're going to plan a party. Where do you start? You're going to plan a party. Where do you start? Whatever your answer was, maybe just ask yourself now, why? Start there. And pretty quickly, you'll probably see that you've likely already highlighted which quadrant you tend to orient from. For me, I'm the upper left person, so I imagine the vibe, what the actual experience will be like. Is it going to be like a cool, chill kind of thing? Is it an active, energetic thing? Do we want it to be, what's the intention of this party? What's an individual imagining, desiring from this, and then go from there to plan the party? A lot of people will start with a guest list, which is most likely the lower left, and thinking about, okay, well, which group of people should I start with and then work out from to plan this party? Who's there? What's the right mix? What's the dynamic between people? Who should or shouldn't be at this party? And if we do have this group, from there, what should the party look like? You might start from the upper right, which probably begins with like the actions, the what you're going to do. So, hey, you're having a party. What will we be doing at the party? Dance party, laser tag, sitting around, on the cottage dock. What are we doing? What's the stuff? What's the party going to be planned around? What drinks are we having? What food are we having? What's going on? What are the things that are there? And the lower right, the collective exterior. Usually people who are orienting from here jump to time, date, and place. Where is this happening? When is it happening? What's the environment that it's happening in? And what does that time or environment allow for? If it's at 5 o'clock, who's going to be stuck in traffic and unable to attend? If it's Saturday night at 8 o'clock, who might have challenges getting babysitters at that time, or who will be out of town? One friend a long time ago said, I'd just start by thinking about how many chairs there are. It's a beautiful lower right its collective exterior question, an inquiry to say, well, yeah, I'm not going to invite more people than there is space for. So I'm going to start with the room, the space, and what can happen with where we're planning this to be. How is this useful to a grade 12 student? Well, teachers have been asking you to write essays or papers for years, and if you have to include 4 paragraphs in an essay on a topic, 1 paragraph per quadrant is likely the most holistic way to approach writing your essays. It ensures that you've addressed at least all 4 aspects of whatever topic it is, that you are talking about. How is this useful? Well, ID the quadrant that you tend to speak from. ID what you favor, identify it, and notice that when you are listening to others, you can practice some interpersonal skills here, and when someone's talking to you about something, which quadrant are they coming from? If you can identify that and speak to that quadrant, you might also have the capacity to bring them out of their quadrant and see the other perspective on this topic from where you're coming from as well. So this can be incredibly helpful and save a lot of wasted time where people aren't really communicating because you're not hearing each other. Speak to that quadrant, the one that you are wanting to address in a topic, and sometimes it's more strategic to speak to and from a specific quadrant. Speak to it and point out when you are addressing a different quadrant. I've noticed particularly in education, we can talk about all 4 aspects of education. Certain teachers get hung up on the experience, the feelings, the motivation, what you have energy for in education, the beliefs about education. Lower right, the culture of a school or a particular grade or a class. We can talk about the actions of what we're doing within a school. What are the best lessons, best activities, and we can talk about the systems, the assessment structures, the planning structures. Where does this fit into our day plan, our year plan, all these things? And in education, when I'm planning with other teachers, we so easily don't hear each other because we're talking from one of these other boxes. So when you can identify where someone's coming from, point out that they're maybe addressing the systems, for example, but you're now wanting to talk about the culture as well. So I would offer you this little sentence of, don't say yes, but. Don't say, yes, there's this systemic issue, but we need to talk about the cultural side or the practical side of what we're doing, or where the motivation is within the group. Don't say yes, but. Say yes, and. Yes, we need to address this lower right systemic exterior collective issue. Yes, and we also need to address the cultural issue. Yes, we need to address that, and our actions, the individual exterior, and the individual interior, the I. So take whatever topic you need to discuss for a class, for a lesson, for a class discussion, whatever it is, put it in the center, and then take time to unpack what that topic looks like and what it is in these 4 quadrants, these 4 different perspectives. Because if you do that, you will be thinking like a genius, because you will have access to more than just your limited biased perspective that you are naturally drawn to. It will help highlight blind spots in your thinking by uncovering probably 3 other perspectives that you often don't take. And it helps to present a more accurate, more full take on what it is you are discussing. Just like those blind folks around the elephant, none of them were wrong, but they weren't right either. They weren't right in the sense of having the largest possible perspective on the topic. They were correct about their piece of an elephant, but they were lacking a way to discuss the elephant as a whole. And I think if you use the quadrants to discuss a topic as a whole, or explore yourself as a whole, it's incredibly useful because you get a larger picture of what it is you are speaking about. So there's the 4 quadrants. Fill in the boxes with whichever words make this practical for you, and pay attention to when others are speaking. Which quadrant are they speaking from or speaking to? And which one are you speaking from and speaking to? And see if you can weave in the other perspectives to have a richer, wider conversation. That, more or less, was me attempting to recreate a lecture I did with my students about this. The feedback from them was that they wish they had been taught this much earlier. One student described this as being like having been shown the matrix through which we discuss and talk about issues, or something to that effect. I hope this has been useful. It wasn't a perfect, here comes my critical side. It wasn't an exact recreation because obviously when I actually taught this, I wasn't in a basement. I had a classroom full of people and we were engaging, talking this through back and forth a lot more. But I think you've got the essence of what we had discussed. Hope this has been useful, and have fun thinking like a genius now.